Good morning, children. Sorry that I can't be here today, but don't you worry, I left you plenty of work to do, and I do expect that it's all done when I come back tomorrow. So this will definitely set you up for some stuff that we're going to do later in the week. So let's get started. I want to first review with you substitute expectations just because I know that sometimes, I'm sure none of you, but some people like to try to take advantage of the situation when the teacher's gone. So just know that number one, the teacher is in charge. And by the teacher, I mean the adult in the room is in charge. Even if their rules don't exactly match mine, I expect you to follow the expectations that they have of you. I'm sure they won't ask you to do anything unreasonable. Second, if your name is left for some negative reason, I'm automatically going to refer you to the vice principal because you should be on your best behavior today. So I'm sure that they won't leave your name if you don't do anything that you shouldn't be doing. So don't do anything that you shouldn't be doing. And remember, that includes not having your phone out. Number three, I want you to use all of your time for today's work. If you're doing the work well, this lesson should take you most of the period, if not the whole period. If you finish early because for some reason you're working faster than other people, number one, you should probably double check to make sure that your work is pretty good. But number two, then only English related activities are appropriate if you finish early. You can read something, you can write something, but I expect you to be doing English related activities. So before we go any further, go ahead and get yourself a new entry task sheet for the entry task that'll be on the next slide. If you need to, you can pause the video until you're ready to go forward. Here is your entry task for today. You'll see that there's an assignment up there. It's called the sensory images chart. That's something that you'll be doing later in the day. And there is an entry task over to the right that requires you to write a single sentence. So this single sentence will be important for something that we're going to be doing both later in this period and then again later in the week. So you really need to have this kind of nailed down. I do expect you to do this on your own. So read the instructions carefully and do the best that you can do. Notice that once you have your sentence written, there's a worksheet that you need to pick up from the substitute. Go ahead and pause this video once you're ready to get to work on this. So before we go on to the next slide, I just want to review this this sentence. So like I said before you pause the video, this is important for something you'll be doing later in the period, but it's also important for something you're going to be doing later in the week when I'm back. And we need to have kind of a selection of possible topic sentences to choose from. So we should have, everybody should at this point have one on their paper, and it may or may not sound similar to what people around you have said. But if you think back to the story, hopefully everybody is able to identify how the story, the narrative perspective in the story shifted from one thing to another thing. Probably the tricky part of this sentence is, well, what did Ambrose Bierce want readers to learn? And as long as you made a guess, so what are we learning from the shift in the perspectives from, from the beginning of the story to the later part of the story? If you made a guess, that's all I'm asking you to do. But if you didn't make a guess, be sure that you do make some kind of intelligent guess. Or maybe you want to talk to your neighbor and ask them what they thought, and maybe that'll help you come up with your own ideas before you leave it. Because everybody does need to have their own topic sentence written on their entry task sheet. So now we're going to move on. If you need to pause it to do a little bit of what I just suggested, go ahead, but we're going to move on to the next slide. So at this point, everybody should have a worksheet called the Sensory Images Worksheet, and you'll see that it's split into two columns. On the left column, it's labeled Sensory Images from Parts 1 and 2. And on the right column, it's labeled Sensory Images from Part 3. So we're talking about the story and occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. And remember that it was split into 3 sections. The first 2 parts were shorter, and then the third section was the longer section. And we also have talked about how the narrative perspective shifts and all of that. But today we're going to be talking about something a little bit different on those from those sections, and that's something that we call sensory images. So if you're wondering what is a sensory image, if you read the slide, it says in reading and writing, imagery can be related to any of the 5 senses: so sight, sound, taste, smell, or touch. And most, if not all of those, are present somewhere in the story. Um, and when we pay attention to how these kinds of sensory images are used, it helps us decipher a story's meaning. And especially when we look at how those types of images change in certain stories. Like in this story, we're going to look at how the use of sensory images changes, which is why you have 2 columns, because it's different in the first part than it is in the second part. So what I would like you to do is I would like you to look at the number of the desk that you're sitting at, which should be your own, by the way. And if you're sitting at an odd numbered spot, you are going to take the next 10 to 15 minutes on your own to write as many sensory image quotes as you can find in sections 1 and 2. So remember, you're looking for quotes that appeal to the senses, any sense: sight, sound, taste, smell, or touch. And you're going to do the same thing if you're sitting at an even numbered spot, but instead of looking at parts 1 and 2, you're going to look for quotes in part 3. Now, everybody should be able to find plenty. If we're only taking 10 to 15 minutes, everybody should be able to fill in those 10 to 15 minutes with looking through and finding quotes and then writing those quotes. So you are being asked to write the quotes on your worksheet. So take a few minutes to do that. You can go ahead and hit pause before we move on to the next section. All right. So everybody should have had a chance. Everybody should have multiple quotes on their assigned section of the paper. You don't need to have anything in the other section of the paper because you weren't asked to do that yet. But everybody should have multiple quotes in their section of the worksheet that they took from whatever part of the story that they were looking at. So the next thing that I want you to do is I want you to come together as a color group. So purples with purples, pinks with pinks, you get the idea. Come together as a color group, and I want you to complete your chart. So everybody probably has some slightly different ideas or some slightly different examples or quotes. I want you to share the quotes with people and give people a chance to write down the quotes that you found. This shouldn't take too long, but it might take a few minutes. But once everybody's had a chance to complete their chart, then I want you to answer the question for the box at the bottom of the chart, which talks about especially feelings that come up. So essentially you're looking at the differences between the sensory images in part 1 and 2 and the sensory images in part 3. They should evoke different styles or different tones or different emotions if you look at the difference between those sections. So take a second with your group to take a few minutes with your group to share and add to your worksheet and then answer that question in the box below the actual chart. Pause the video and we can go on later. All right. So at this point, everybody should have a full worksheet, a complete worksheet with plenty of quoted details that have to do with sensory images. You should also have some ideas for how to describe those images and the differences between those images in parts 1 and 2, and then part 3. A lot of people will probably notice that the images from parts 1 and 2 are very kind of cold, they're kind of straightforward. They tend to be more visual than anything else. I think a lot of people will notice that. And I don't know what kinds of emotions go along with them, but you probably were able to come up with a few. And if you need to add a couple while I'm talking here, you can. And then you'll notice that probably in part 3, there's a lot more sensation. There's a lot more, there is imagery, but then there's also, the sensation of the ropes, the sensation of the water. There's the sounds that he hears and the smells that he takes in. There's a lot more nuance and a lot more, it almost feels more creative, I think. And those will evoke different emotions. So if you need to write down, if I said something here that helps you fill in that last little section of your worksheet, you can make sure to do that now. But here's the next thing that I want you to do. So I want you to look at those differences from the box below, the boxes at the bottom of the worksheet. And I want you to just think to yourself about how the imagery changes or evolves. And what might that evolution be telling us about the meaning of the story? There's a reason that the sensory images in parts 1 and 2 are different than the sensory images in part 3, and that they evoke different sensations and different emotions and different styles. So what might that be telling us about the meaning of the story? And then what I want you to do is, back on your entry task sheet, you're going to write a second possible topic sentence. This is about the sensory details, not about the change in narrative perspective, which you did at the beginning of the period. So the sentence that I'd like you to fill in is this: Ambrose Bierce's use of sensory images in an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge shifts between blank in parts 1 and 2 to blank in part 3. So you can pick words from the bottom part of your worksheet for that if it's appropriate. And then you need to go on in the sentence to answer this part, in order to represent blank. So in order to represent that blank spot should be, well, what is that meaning that it's representing? Everybody should do this on their own, fill in the sentence on their own. You don't need to talk to your neighbor. I want you to use your own ideas for this assignment. You can pause the video, and there's one more step after this. All right. So if there's time, now I hope that everybody's at least able to get through the last slide, but if there's time left in class, which I hope there is, but this is what I want you to do. I want you to share each person's topic sentence, and at this point, everybody should have 2, which means that a group of 4 should have 8 possible topic sentences. 4 of them should be about the shift in narrative detail or narrative perspective, and 4 of them should be about the differences in sensory images. So you're going to share all 8 of them, and I want you to discuss as a group the strengths of each one, and then as a group I want you to decide on which one of the 8 is the strongest. Once you decide on which one is the strongest, then every person in your group needs to write the chosen topic sentence on the back of the sensory images worksheet, and that worksheet is due at the end of the period. So everybody in your group, all the purples, should have on the back of their on the back of their worksheet, should have the same topic sentence by the end of this that you've picked from your stash of 8 possible topic sentences. And this is where we're going to pick up tomorrow, and everybody in your group will be working with that topic sentence. Have a good day, and I'll see you on Tuesday.